Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Great to have you here at the Poynter Institute. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Friday night to join us here at Poynter for what I think will be a very terrific and engaging discussion. For those of you who aren't familiar with Poynter, just a quick commercial about the Poynter Institute. Poynter is a global leader in journalism education, working with everyone from middle school students to Pulitzer Prize winners. Last year, Poynter taught nearly 100,000 journalists and journalism educators around the world. We taught journalists from 91 countries, and we did programs in 28 states and in the District of Columbia. And we also have one of the nation's best read media sites, Poynter.org. So why is all this important? Because we inform and train journalists so they can do their jobs better. And an informed citizenry is the very lifeblood, the very oxygen of any democracy. So Poynter is all about improving journalism and democratic societies across the globe. Before we get started tonight, I just wanted to again thank our sponsors this evening, including Doyle Wealth Management and Andrake McMullen, who is with us this evening, Tampa Bay Publishing and Greg Truax, B2 Communications and Kyle Parks, Fry Masterson and Associates and Matt Fry, Sharon Folta and our sponsors from WUSF. I want to thank Watson Haynes from the Pinellas County Urban League, and also State Representative Darrell Roussan, who I believe is in the audience with us this evening as well. Representative, thank you. Okay, introductions. First, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator this evening, Kristen Hare. Kristen is an award-winning reporter for Poynter.org. She's won honors from the University of Missouri and the Society for Features Journalism. Last year, she was a finalist for the Top Media Reporting Award in the country for a story that she did for Poynter.org. We also sent Kristen to Ferguson, Missouri last year to cover the coverage of the Michael Brown shooting and its aftermath. So, Kristen, thank you. Now it's my high honor and privilege to introduce to you our featured speaker tonight, the co-anchor of ABC's Nightline, Mr. Byron Pitts. Byron is a two-time winner of the National Emmy Award. As the chief national correspondent for CBS News, Byron helped lead the network's coverage of the 9/11 terror attacks, winning an Emmy Award in the process. He's reported from war zones, including Iraq and Afghanistan. And while at 60 Minutes, he served as a correspondent for the blockbuster news magazine 60 Minutes. He made the move to ABC News in 2013 and was just named co-anchor of Nightline at the end of last year. We're proud of the fact that Byron is a Poynter alum and has been a valued visiting faculty member of the Institute over the years. Byron not only has had a remarkable career in broadcast journalism, but he's had a remarkable life's journey as well. He was raised in the gritty streets of East Baltimore by a single mom. He suffered from a debilitating stutter. At the age of 12, he was deemed to be functionally illiterate. He was near the bottom of his class in school then. But with the encouragement of his mom, the encouragement of a coach, mentors, and teachers, Byron graduated from Archbishop Curley High School in the top tier of his class. And he later graduated from Ohio Wesleyan University with a degree in journalism and speech communications. Byron is a man of faith. And when he was 18 years old, he admired the late, great Ed Bradley of 60 Minutes. Quote, "My prayer since I was 18 was, Lord, make me good enough to work at 60 Minutes someday." Well, guess what? That prayer was answered. I'm honored to introduce to you tonight an amazing American success story and an extraordinary journalist, Mr. Byron Pitts.
Thank you. Thank you, brother. Thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Well, I just want to start by welcoming all of you to Poynter. We're delighted that you're here to talk with us tonight and to welcome you back to Poynter. We have a lot to talk about tonight. Awesome. I was thinking earlier this evening that we could spend the next hour talking about the last week in our country. We're going to go beyond that, but it's been a week. So I just wanted to start with a clip that I think helps tell everybody a little bit more about you. Tim got to a bit of it just now.
Oh, can I say one thing about what Tim
Please.
said? Thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's funny, talking about my high school prowess. So in high school, I went to an all-boys Catholic high school in East Baltimore, run by Franciscans. I was ranked 345th out of 350 students. And I've always thought, well, damn, who are the 5 guys who were worse than me? I graduated 40th in my class. Not the best student, but better than I started out.
So let's see a little bit about your journey.
I'm Byron Pitts.
60 Minutes correspondent Byron Pitts covers it all. And now he's telling a different story, his own, in his new autobiography.
For me, step out on nothing means to have a faith so deep, a belief so strong that you can do something. Others may doubt you, but your belief is so strong, your passion is so strong that you go out and you do what it is that you set out to do.
Pitts was functionally illiterate until he was 12 years old. With the help of his brother, he would memorize small parts of books so he could participate in class, so no one knew he couldn't read.
My story is a story of millions of Americans, people who can't read, who are faking it. I met a man in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, married to a school teacher in his 30s, and no one knew he could read.
It was never determined why Pitts actually struggled with his reading, but he prevailed and eventually enrolled at a small Ohio college where big dreams were no problem.
When I was 18 years old and said, I'm going to work for 60 Minutes when I'm 45 years old, I was on academic probation. I was a midterm away from flunking out of college. An English professor told me I wasn't a good writer. So it was a bold dream back then to say, I'm going to work for 60 Minutes someday.
And along the way, there were angels, like his college roommate who helped him with his stuttering problem, or the English professor who helped Pitts with his schoolwork and stopped him from dropping out of college.
I didn't know her, she didn't know me. And she simply said, son, what's wrong? Come to find out, she was the English professor, and she helped me. She stepped out on nothing. She had nothing to gain by helping me, but did it anyway. And she didn't just change my life, she saved my life.
The Amish will bury
And now Pitts is an Emmy Award-winning journalist who can look back and crack a smile when he sees his former self.
And if you can imagine this big head on like a 6-year-old boy, it wasn't a pretty sight.
Writing his book was a chance for Pitts to confront his own past and inspire readers to overcome their own adversity.
You can get past your struggles if you surround yourself with the right people, if you have the right attitude. I am an optimistic person by choice. It ain't easy sometimes being an optimist, but it's a choice that people can make. And I've made it, and it's worked for me, and I would encourage other people to make the same kind of choice.
So when I watched that video, the thing that I wondered first was, what made you want to work for 60 Minutes as a young man, and what made you want to be a journalist?
Well, I wanted to be a journalist for a couple of reasons. One, because of my, as mentioned before, I'm a person of faith. I'm Baptist, right? I like to say I had the best of both worlds, educated Catholic, raised Baptist. And thank you for laughing. I've been in some Presbyterian audiences where people are like, what? So because of my faith tradition, my mother raised us to believe to count it all joy, that everything that happens in your life happens for a reason, and that all of us are given certain gifts from God. And so my mother convinced me that my early struggles with literacy and my struggles with stuttering, I didn't learn to manage my stutter until my junior year in college. That all of those were sort of giftings from God, that because I had to spend extra time to get better at those two things, it was actually God sort of like the story of little David, like, you know what I mean, undersized, but there's something special in life for you to do. That was one thing. My church, the pastor of my boyhood church, Reverend Harold A. Carter, was an associate minister of Dr. King at Dexter in Alabama. And so when Dr. King made the choice as a young man to go lead SCLC and do that, my pastor and Andy Young and some other men chose to follow him. My pastor said, you know what? That's not my calling. My calling is to pastor a church, hopefully a big church, and I'll be supportive of the movement, help raise money, those kinds of things. So he came to Baltimore and pastored a church. What a blessing for me. So my church was fairly active in the late 60s, early 70s in the civil rights movement, primarily raising funds from Baltimore. But I remember my mother who couldn't afford child care, so she took her kids everywhere she went. If she went, like I remember my mother used to go to her favorite drinking spot with her and her girlfriends Friday after work. It was called the Federal Street Lounge in Baltimore. And my mother would usually take me. All right, it was either that or leave me at home. And so I would sit by the foosball table. Me and my brother, we played foosball. My mom and her girlfriends, did their thing. But she would also take me to, because there wasn't any program at church Friday night, so that was the alternative. But she would also, would take me to rallies that our church would participate in. And so as a young child, I saw how the police would treat us if the press was there. Excuse me, ma'am, you're too close, would you please step back? If there was no press there, get your black ass back over there. Wow. So as an 8, 9-year-old boy, I saw that the media had the power to keep the powerful in check. Third thing, my mother, my hero. God called her home 4 years ago this December. Strong, great woman of faith like many of the women in this room. I mean, there's something special. I mean, men, fathers, we're cool, but mamas, right? I mean, a strong mama will kill a brick for her child, right? My mother, strongest person I've ever known, most powerful person I've ever been in the presence of. I've only seen my mother cry twice. The second time I saw her cry was when she was told that I was functionally illiterate, and the recommendation from the experts was that I was also mentally retarded and should be institutionalized. To which she said no and fought hard for me. The first time I heard my mother cry, a few years prior, was when it came on the radio that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. And my mother wept. I mean, fell to her knees, wept, crying. And I thought, wow, this is the baddest person on earth I know, and something that she heard on the radio moved her to tears. So believing that God has a lane for all of us, that count it all joy, there's a gifting for each of us, that maybe my gifting was writing and communicating. I saw the influence of the media to keep the powerful in line. And then I saw the power of the media to move people to tears, to also inspire them, to make people feel courageous when the world might say they shouldn't be. So all those reasons, I thought, yeah, that's my calling. And so like I know as a parent, when I talk to my kids and parents talk to their kids and go to college, okay, baby, have a plan B. Like, go to school to be a neuroscientist, but get your teaching certificate, just to make sure, so you can eat, right? But I only had one dream, one path, because I knew I wasn't bright enough to have multiple paths. I had one opportunity.
I think it worked out okay.
So far.
You didn't keep those glasses, did you?
Oh, those are some cool glasses.
Those are some cool
The
glasses.
funny thing about those glasses would go for big money now.
You would be such a hipster if
Right?
you had those glasses
But
now.
back in the day, I tried breaking them, hiding them. My mom, like if I broke a pair of glasses, Mom would say, okay, here's some tape.
Nice.
So when I got tired of her taping them, I stopped breaking them. Yeah.
So we're talking tonight about race in America and how the media covers it. And I watched back clips of yours from the last 15 years. And I wondered as I was watching your reporting if you in your lifetime have ever seen anything like what happened in Ferguson on August 8th of last year.
I would imagine for, particularly I would think for any person of color in this room, certainly any person of color of a certain age, but certainly anyone in the audience of a certain age. Yeah, I felt like I'd seen it before, whether I'd witnessed it personally. I remember, Tim, Mondawmin Mall in Baltimore. There was a rally there when I was a little boy with my mom. Forget what it was, what the issue was, but something around civil rights. And I remember two things occurred at this rally. First, the police seemed to get aggressive and go at the crowd and were chasing people and running. So we were running from this. I remember running with my brother and sister. We had lost my mama in the crowd and being scared to death that we'd be hurt by the police. By the time we got to the parking lot to our car, hoping our mother would make it there too, I remember these black guys beating up these white guys. And the white guys were there in support of the rally. But these black guys just saw a white face and thought, you know, you're the man, you're part of my problem. And I remember I was scared to death. I remember my sister, who was 10 years older, and my brother, who was 7 years older. My brother's one of those big bone, right? 15, looks like he's 30. They intervened because, you know, that's how they were raised. But yeah, so I've seen the dynamic of tension and what hate can do to people on both sides. You know, there's this, I said this earlier today, there's this powerful quotation from Dr. King in 1963. Dr. King was asked by a journalist to talk about the riots, I think in Watts or someplace in the United States. So what did he think about the rioting and the looting and how awful it was that people were destroying their own neighborhoods? And Dr. King said a couple things. But the first thing he said is that the riot is the language of the unheard. Riot is didn't try and justify it, because he went on to say that rioting is destructive, that people shouldn't destroy their own communities, but he understood it. And it was true in 1963, it's true in 2015, that kind of aggression, no reasonable person accepts that or believes that it's right. But I think you can understand it.
We've seen these stories in the last year that have some common threads.
Yeah.
We've seen them in Ferguson. We've seen them in Cleveland.
Yeah.
And
Madison, Wisconsin, liberal Madison. Yeah.
And one of the things I wonder, one of the things I wonder is, has something changed, do you think, for people of color in our country? Or has the media just really started paying attention?
Oh, I think it's just started paying attention. I remember, it's funny, if I could show everyone my driver's license, right? I just took my driver's license. I now have a New York driver's license, very exciting. It was the easiest DMV process I've ever been through, right? My girlfriend and I just like that. Anyway, so if you ever looked at my driver's license, you'll see that on my driver's license, I have a big smile on my face. And I don't come from a grinning, smiling family, but I took my driver's license, my brother, and again, family pictures, driver's license, and here's why. My uncle, we call him Preacher, his name is Luther. Call him Preacher because he loved chicken as a child. Some folk will get that, some folk won't, but it's okay, right? So my uncle Preacher, and I went to an all-boys, predominantly white high school, Archbishop Curley, and so I took driver's ed at school. And so my uncle was taking me for some extra practice in the neighborhood in Baltimore. And he says, boy, so what them folk teach you at school? And I got, parallel park, the 11, 5 o'clock, hold the steering wheel, all those kinds of things. He said, man, them white folk didn't teach you anything. I said, what are you talking about? He says, if Mr. Charlie pull you over, what do you do? Excuse me, uncle? Mr. Charlie, when he pulls you over, what do you do? He meant when a police officer, presumably a white police officer, pulls you over, you need to have your license out, registration, window down, hands on the steering wheel so there's no confusion. This is 1976. And he said, and boy, when you take your picture for your driver's license, make sure you're smiling. Because you don't want any white cop to see an angry black man when he sees you. That was 1978. 2015, I got my driver's license photo maybe 2 weeks ago. Were you ready? Yes, sir. And I didn't do that out of any sense of shame or, in many ways, in my mind, sort of honoring my uncle's perspective on the world. So certainly I think for many people of color, this isn't anything new. It is, Dr. King said, the language of the unheard. People have felt angry, have felt marginalized for a very long time. That's why people were surprised that when the Justice Department report first came out that folk weren't tearing down buildings. Because what people in Ferguson would say, we've been telling y'all that for years. Now that there's statistical support for it, but we know it. And so, yeah, I had a colleague recently asked me about running. Like, where do I run outside? Like, bro, I don't run outside. I run the treadmill. Well, why is that? So, well, years ago I was in Alabama on a story early in the morning in my, my workout gear and, doing my thing. I, like Bill Clinton, I start slow and taper off when I'm running, right? So now I'm running. It's like 6 o'clock in the morning. And this police car pulls up next to me in Alabama. Guy says, can I help you? No, I'm good. Keeps going. Now, can I help you? No, I'm still good. I was good. I'm still good. So he kind of cuts me off a little bit. He says, what are you doing? I say, excuse me? What are you doing? I said, let's see. It's 6 in the morning. I have on a T-shirt, shorts, cute little socks, sneakers. I'm moving at a moderate pace. I'm thinking running. What do you think? You getting smart with me? I'm like, sir, like, where are we going with this conversation? Anyway, so it became sort of like, you know what? To avoid putting him through that, wherever he may be, and me through that, I'll just run on treadmills. So, so I think people of color have made those kinds of choices in small ways forever. So, yeah, so I think the media has just caught up to a bigger debate. If I can say this quickly, so I make sure I say it. My feeling is, both from professional experience, while certainly race is an important conversation we should have, but for me, the more troubling conversation is about class and how people, because trust me, there are some poor white kids in Appalachia, in Western Virginia, who live in Ferguson and are enduring Ferguson. The difference is they're white, but they're all poor. And I find that thread, for me, as disturbing as Ferguson, what happened to the gentleman in New York was to me, I was equally disturbed about what happened at Norman, Oklahoma. Right? That there it was, because it goes against the normal narrative. Because the normal narrative is it's only rednecks, hillbillies, and ignorant folk who feel that way, who do those things. But this was one of the great universities of America, future leaders, young people who thought it was okay. Young people who someday will be in positions of leadership in companies, to hire and fire people who will make decision makers. For me, in many ways, that is as dangerous as what happened in Ferguson, right? Because like I certainly have concerns about my children, the representative children, encountering the police at the wrong time, at the wrong block, on the wrong day. But I'm more concerned, more likely about his children, my children, everyone's children, sitting across from the kid from SAE 10 years from now when they're deciding who's going to be the next vice president of this company. And the kid from SAE with those views says, no, it can't be you. And those kinds of opportunities concern me as well.
Let's watch a clip from November when you visited Ferguson after the grand jury ruled not to indict Darren Wilson in the death of Mike Brown.
Few signs of cooling off here in the boiling pot that is Ferguson, Missouri. It seems Officer Darren Wilson's first public comments have done little to ease tensions here. In fact, for some, they made matters worse.
And that's when he turned and said, what the gonna do about it?
Almost from the moment Officer Darren Wilson opened his mouth, the reaction here was strong.
He didn't seem remorseful.
I didn't hear him apologize one time.
Patrons at this St. Louis barbershop doubting his version of that deadly encounter with Michael Brown.
I don't believe that. I don't believe what he's saying.
How do you think your friends will react if they saw?
They know he was lying. Everybody in the community knows he's lying.
Jalen is an 18-year-old college freshman.
You ever been stopped by the police?
Yeah, I have been stopped by the police plenty of times. Abused, verbally assaulted by the police.
Show of hands if you've ever been stopped by the police, treated unfairly by the police.
Two hands up. I got both feet up. 2 hands and 2 feet. Yes.
These men are voicing frustration, but today around the country, from Ferguson to New York, to Oakland, to Boston, people are demonstrating it. Last night, Michael Brown's mother erupted in tears after the announcement the grand jury did not indict the man who killed her son.
We object publicly and loudly as we can on behalf of Michael Brown Jr.'s family that this process is broken.
But there are deep and bitter emotions on both sides. Supporters of Officer Wilson interrupted a Brown family press conference today. Fighting broke out until Michael Brown Sr. intervened.
I don't want to hear that.
As for the barbershop tonight, a metaphor of sorts for America. Yes, millions watched Officer Wilson, but what you heard may well have been colored by the life you've lived.
Because I'm a father myself, when you start losing your kids behind it, it really, turns into your soul, and you want something to happen.
So one of the things that I have been asked a lot since I got back from Ferguson in August is what really happened? What did you really see? And I think what people are asking is if what I saw with my own 2 eyes was the same as what they were seeing on television and what they were reading. When you were in Ferguson, what did you see?
You know, so a lot of things. One of the interesting things about like our business, oftentimes of journalism, that we go in, rightly or wrongly, and shed a very intense light on a specific place. If you get the short time I spent in Ferguson, in and around the police station, it was tense. But you know, you go 3 blocks away and folk are still doing business. I remember I spent some time in Egypt, right? And so if you go to the square, it is all out crazy. If you go 5 blocks away to the JW Marriott where I was staying, folk were tanning by the pool and eating cracked crab, and life was good. So like this whole thing about race, it's complicated, right? Like in the business of journalism, we like black and white. As Americans, we are a microwave society. We want things fixed by the, you know, if you watch, what's the one that has the gladiators on ABC? Scandal. If you watch Scandal, right, by 10 o'clock, it's solved. So as a society, that's what we want. You know, we want it fixed and move on.
Right.
Yeah, and so the tension is very real. The mistrust is real on both sides. You know, I did a story from a law person's perspective and what their job is, and I have great admiration for people who wear the uniform to protect communities. I had a friend of mine tell me years ago, they had a saying in law enforcement, I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. That's real. That's powerful. I remember when I was an embed reporter in Iraq with the Marine Corps. And any veterans in the room? Thank you for your service. Welcome home. Thank you. I remember being with the Marines when a firefight broke out in downtown Baghdad. We were at the Ministry of Oil, and they were ambushed. And I remember laying on my belly like a snake, scared to death. And I'm at the foot of the captain, Captain Schreffler from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And so one of his Marines cohorts said, Captain, we've identified the threat. Can we take the shot? I'm thinking, hallelujah. And he says, who exactly is it? And he says, well, we're not sure, but the fire is coming from that direction. He says, you can't shoot. Until you know exactly who it is, you cannot engage them. So I thought, maybe because he thought, because the camera was, so I pulled at his boot. I didn't get up. I said, Captain, if you're worried about us, kill everybody. Just get me back to base safe. So a lot of times, like in this debate about law enforcement and how they do their job, it's easy to say, oh my gosh, how could he or she have done that? To wear that uniform, to do what they're asked to do, and the consequence of being wrong is so final. You know, I understand why, you know, some things happen the way they happen.
We're going to watch a clip from, I think it was from Baltimore, with Echoes of Ferguson, which gets into a lot of what you're talking about right now.
We're taking a look at the clashes between the police and the people they're sworn to protect, with questions of race and inequality swirling at the center. But the answers are not always black and white. Our Byron Pitts delves into these thorny issues with a personal journey to his hometown of Baltimore for the first installment of ABC's week-long series, Race, Justice in America.
Once again tonight, as temperatures fall across America,
no peace.
Tempers are rising. Protesters scream. Parents pleading. The mother of that black 12-year-old boy killed in Cleveland, gunned down by a white policeman who mistook the child's toy gun for a real one. The moment caught on surveillance.
What would you like to see happen right now?
That the police be accountable for what they did to my son.
Die ends for New York's Eric Garner. Hands up, don't shoot for Ferguson, Missouri's Michael Brown. Sports stars like LeBron James making their own statement. In these cases and others, the optics scream America's old wound of race and justice has been reopened. Again today, the president weighed in, this time on black entertainment television.
I want my grandsons to be treated like anybody else's grandsons.
But is it that simple? Eric Garner's widow said no on Meet the Press Sunday.
I don't even feel like it's a black and white thing, honestly.
If what has our nation convulsing from New York to L.A., Washington to Atlanta is more complicated than race, no place is it more complicated than Baltimore, America's 26th largest city. The political and the powerful pass it by in the comfort of fast-moving trains. Be more, my beloved hometown, known for the Inner Harbor, the Orioles, crab cakes.
Turn around.
And for better or worse, HBO's The Wire. An edgy police drama, a supposed fictional look at a city ravaged by crime and corruption after all those with means to leave did. Much of what The Wire portrayed is real.
This is the area I grew up in. My little high school's over there. Archbishop Curley High School.
I go home to Baltimore often.
What role, if any, does race play in that dynamic here in Baltimore?
We absolutely have to let race go. Like we often joke that when nobody's white, nobody's black, we're all blue.
Excuse me. I did speak, and I did ask you a question, right?
Distrust between the public and police is palpable.
They don't look at us as people. They just see the uniform and see police officers.
We spent several days and nights with cops on the street. A call goes out for a cop in need of backup. Plainclothes and uniformed officers speed to the scene, guns drawn. Turns out it was one teenager stopped on suspicion of drug possession. That show of force made neighbors livid.
The people, the innocent bystanders, and I mean like the pedestrians that want to stand around and walk through, we get harassed the most.
There's such a police presence in this area because it's so violent. You actually really didn't need 20 police officers there, but everybody came.
That's Lieutenant Joel Fry. This is his unit.
And you make no apologies for that show of force, right? Absolutely not. I mean, because our safety is paramount. I mean, I've seen plenty of police get hurt and even killed because we didn't have that show of force. And I'm not going to apologize for that.
Lieutenant Fry is white. Baltimore is a predominantly black city. But it turns out here the tension isn't just race. The police department is 41% black. The police commissioner and the mayor, both African American. And look at this. One of the many cameras set up across the city captures a black police officer punching a black man. The officer was charged with assault and is now on leave. The latest in a series of questionable encounters. The city of Baltimore has paid out $5.7 million in the last 4 years to settle more than 100 cases of alleged police brutality.
Is it black and white, or is it black versus blue?
I think it's a little bit of both.
That legacy of race still exists.
It does. It does. The level of trust has increased, but it continues to take dips down.
Kwesi Nfumi, former head of the NAACP, a congressman from Baltimore, a proud son of Baltimore. He was a gangbanger as a young man, fathered a number of children out of wedlock. Somebody, some moment intervened in his life, got his education, now is a positive force in Baltimore and an expert about life in Baltimore.
I chose that clip because I felt like it showed that this conversation is not as simple as we sometimes want to make it.
Yeah.
Do you think the media is doing a good enough job capturing the complexities?
No.
What do they need to do better?
Child, where do we start? One, there's limited time and space, right? So our friend, the newspaper editor, knows there's just so much time and space. Let me say this, and it is a long answer, but for one, journalism has become now a business, right? Editors have to be accountable to the business people. TV producers have to, right? You got to, advertisers. So there's now an expectation on news organizations that wasn't there 40 years ago, that part of your responsibility, along with serving the public, is to meet a bottom line, to make money. Well, how do you make money? Well, there's so much money to be made covering Ferguson. There's a certain amount of money being made covering the festival. You know what I mean? So that's the reality. Like one of the biggest reasons why the media scaled back on its coverage of the war, remember when the Iraq War first started? Every day, 24 hours a day, everybody was in Iraq. Well, a couple things happened. One, journalists start dying. And there wasn't a long line to go to Iraq to begin with. Secondly, like CBS, and this number isn't exact right, CBS News was spending something like $1 million a week to keep people on the ground in Iraq. Now, in the early days, passion, fervor, it was important. But eventually, the folk from accounting called downstairs and said, wait a minute, well, I understand y'all doing God's work, but unless God's going to start putting $1 million a week back in the budget. So I think I think there's an economic reality part of it. Also, there is, like any profession, I think there's a measure of laziness in our business, right? It's far easier. People always ask me, like, why is it, the woman with the gold teeth and the rollers in her hair, why is she on television? And the simple answer is, she's at home. When you come up to the crime scene a day later and you want to get a reaction, the working folk, they're at work, right? Shaniqua and Bobby Ray, they're the only ones home, so you talk to them. So the lazy reporters will just go talk to them and, whoo, we're done. It takes a little more effort to go. So I think there's an economic part. I think there's a level of laziness. Also, I think there is a lack of diversity in major news organizations, right? I mean, I look at the diversity in this room. This room looks much more like America than almost any newsroom in the country. Sure. I would imagine the Baltimore Sun, again, one of the great American newspapers in a heavily black city. I would imagine probably the bulk of their staff. I'm almost certain that the bulk of the editorial staff was probably white male. That's a challenge because, again, because of my life experience, I see the police, certainly people who I respect, appreciate what they do, but my life experience tells me what they're capable of. So for me, like when I go to a crime scene and I interview Shaniqua, Billy Ray, and the police officer, because of my life experience, I almost give equal weight to all three because I know from a life experience all three might be lying to me, right? But if you grew up in some other part of the country and your life experience is different, there are people, wonderful people in this room, for instance, who may have a perception of New York, but they've never been. There are people who I've worked with in New York who've never been to Florida and have a perception of what Florida is about. Not true. So I think that lack of diversity causes people to stay in certain lanes to presume certain things. I remember, I'll give one final example about that. I was covering Hurricane Katrina, the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. And we are standing outside of like an Eckert's drugstore. And these black men were looting the store, going and stealing. Awful. Nothing justifies that. Now, I know if it had been East Baltimore, I might have recognized some of the folk going to the store and might have said, come on, cuz, put that TV back down, right? Just because of where I come from. Anyway, so we're there. And so I know because of where I grew up, like here's sort of the flow of the brothers going in and out of Eckert's. And I knew as long as I stood right there, I'd be fine. Cameraman I was working with from Washington, D.C., a white guy. But his only professional experience was covering congressional hearings in D.C., where it's very polite. You show up at a certain time. There's lunch in the middle of the day. There's air conditioning. So to get a different angle of the brothers looting the store, he stepped over there, and the brothers went off. And you can see, I'm like, man, just step back right over here, and you'll be fine. And sure enough, he stepped back, and the guys, again, perspective, right. Context. And so a lot of times people go to, like, here's an example of recent news. So Fox News, I was talking to someone about this earlier. Fox News had a guy on television, an African-American man, who was explaining away what happened in Ferguson with the incident, the shooting of the two white police officers. Again, no reasonable person, black, white, red, knows that was at all justified. So Fox interviews this black guy, good-looking black guy, articulate. I hate that word. We can have a conversation about that. But anyway, interviews this guy, and he says he explained what happened in that shooting, that it was a conspiracy by the Klan to make black people look bad, that the Klan shot these two white cops, and so now white cops are out chasing black men for like it's like a manual to keep up with this brother, right? Okay, now one can make the argument, is it even worthwhile even putting a microphone in front of him to even have a conversation, right? Because we all know crazy when we see it. Some of us recognize it sooner than others, and so I think that lack of diversity. And finally, because it is complicated. It is complicated. We all, like the reality is, for instance, at major networks, truth be told, in my business, for a variety of reasons, we love it. Love it isn't the right word, but if like a big event happens, like you would prefer in my business, this is awful to say, but like if there was major breaking news, spot news, you name a disaster, it's okay if it happens on Sunday. You got a day to get to town. By Wednesday, Thursday, it's about wrapped up. By Friday, you're going back to wherever you live. Because it's, all of us like routine, all of us, right? Whereas something like Ferguson, it's complicated. It's not this or that, though we try and make it. And so therefore, I think because people come from it with false pretense, because it is complicated, the expense of it, it's nuanced, and journalism doesn't do nuance very well.
I want to show a clip that does nuance and context very well.
With questions about justice front and center in a heated nationwide debate about race, we're bringing you behind closed doors for an intimate look at what that means for families. What do we say to our own children? What are they learning on the streets, in school, from us? Two dads invited me into these personal discussions as part of our week-long look at race, justice in America. Two families living only miles apart.
Hello.
Both with dedicated fathers.
I had a math test.
How do you think you did?
I think I did pretty good.
Each with a 10-year-old boy.
You're a nerd.
Yeah, I'm a nerd.
Yeah, just like me.
Yeah.
Both middle class, married, college educated.
Hey, remember this?
But when it comes to the issue of race, these fathers and sons live in different worlds.
Have you ever felt like people treated you differently because you were black?
Kind of in a way.
Kind of in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard kids being racist.
Sure.
And they get in trouble right away. It's definitely big in school because kids just start messing around.
It's a chilly Wednesday in suburban Philadelphia. Daniel Kay and his son Aiden are planting the final touches of their favorite winter tradition, Christmas lights. Lots of them.
We've got
Christmas
trees, mini Christmas trees, a big one in my bedroom, but there's a twist.
What is that?
We're Jewish.
Yeah.
Every snowman here is my mom.
Aiden is bright, an old soul.
Down here, this is actually handcrafted.
10 going on 30. But what's happening now across America? The protests, the anger after the deaths of Michael Brown and Eric Garner, has this little boy asking big questions, questions his father struggles to answer.
He's African American, and people just, for some strange reason, don't think that they're equals.
There's that part of me that looks at him and sees him as this innocent little boy, and I hate the thought of having to have conversations like this, but there are people who are living this.
The Kays live in Abington, a predominantly white Philadelphia suburb. Daniel's always told Aiden he has nothing to fear from police, but now he wants to teach him that for many people, that's not the case.
Dad, what's going on in Ferguson?
Do you talk about that in school? Like, did any of the kids ever say anything?
Yeah, it's been brought up. Our teacher brought it up once, but every once in a while a kid will bring it up, and then everyone will start saying their opinion, and then the teacher kind of has to calm it down.
You can't say, all police are this or all police are that. They're our friends and they work really hard to protect our community, but, you have to be honest that there are problems.
You know who Eric Garner is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's Eric Garner?
A person who was choked to death by a police officer.
Good morning. This is Solomon Jones on the 900 AM W.
For Solomon Jones, a popular radio host, the race talk is a running dialogue with his son, Solomon III.
When I look at my son, I see him as this AB student. He's soft-spoken. He wants to be a scientist. And I just don't want my son to have to go through some of the things that I've been through and some of the things that I've seen other people go through.
Young Solomon is quiet, studious, not a troublemaker. But his father worries in the heat of a moment, that won't matter.
If you get stopped by the police, even if you feel like they stopped you for no reason, like harassing you, just be polite. Just get out of the situation so you can come home. And then we can file charges against them later.
Solomon wants to make sure his son is safe, that his face doesn't end up on a poster like this. Nearly 2/3 of blacks say race played a major factor in the decision not to indict the police officers who killed Michael Brown and Eric Garner, while only 1 in 6 whites call race a major factor. So why the divide? We wanted to hear the conversation behind closed doors, the safety of homes, black and white, father and son.
Certainly when I was a boy, right, your parents, in my case my mom, you had like the sex talk, right?
Yeah.
But in my house, we also had the race talk.
Right.
Do you guys ever have that conversation here?
No, we don't, except when something happens.
I completely understand it. With the thing at Ferguson, I think African American people would be scared that a policeman would do that again.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that after this Ferguson thing, I think they should trust the police still. They shouldn't be like, I'm never going to call a policeman if I have an emergency.
Right.
I think they should at least try calling them.
Statistically speaking, young black males are 21 times more likely.
There was a moment in that piece that, if I may, I mentioned I liked a longer version of the story where these two adorable 10-year-old boys, right? I mean, it's hard to have the race conversation because all of us, we all bring our own baggage to the conversation. But, you know, anyway, so there was a point where I asked the two boys, both 10, both bright, from loving homes, to close their eyes and describe a police officer. The white kid closes his eyes and says, oh, okay, police officer, blue uniform, black shoes, black belt, silver badge, black kid. Police officer, gun, taser, nightstick. I don't know what it says, but it says something.
Why was this an important story for you to tell?
Well, because I want to, you know, it's my job as a journalist to, you know, shed light in dark places and to create space where people can inform the public. You know, the great Edward R. Murrow said, you know, the job of television news is to inform, enlighten, and inspire. And if it's not that, it's just a box with wires, right? And so I still believe that. And again, about the importance of diversity, we sort of having the conversation in the newsroom at Nightline about, wow, you know, we're having this new conversation. Like, no, it might be new for some of us, but for a lot of folk, it's. And so where can we go and have that conversation? Because one of my colleagues, Dan Harris at ABC, a good man, and we had a conversation once about how hard it is sometimes to have the race conversation. If the context of the race conversation, that me as a black person talking to a white person, that you are the problem, you hurt me, you victimize me, and my perspective is I'm the victim, it's hard for us to have, whether real or imagined, it's hard for us to have a conversation. And yeah, so my job is to contribute to the debate, is to tell stories that allow people to think in a different way. Like I had this wonderful conversation earlier with Barry Edwards, who is a political consultant, helps people win campaigns. And so we were having sort of like the race conversation. And people, I mean, there are legitimate conversations to ask, and people on both sides wonder, what about this? So this is the conversation that we had at the table over a great meal. So I asked, so he's 53, I'm 54. So I asked him what his parents did. Both of his parents worked in professional areas, right? My mom was a social worker, my dad was a meat cutter. Okay, cool. I asked him what his grandparents did. I think his grandfather was in the printing business. His grandmother was a farmer. My grandmother was a domestic for a part of her life, but at one point she was a tobacco grower with my grandfather. Great, we're still about the same. What did your great-grandparents do? My great-grandparents were farmers. Cool. My great-grandparents were slaves. Dog, cat, plow, tractor, soil, nigger slave. Farmer, you could be dirt poor. So what are the moral lessons there? Perhaps as the child of a farmer, you learn ingenuity. You learn entrepreneurship. You learn the importance of education. Because those of us from a farming background know you can't be dumb and be a farmer. Okay, what are the lessons learned? What is the legacy of being the child of a dog, of a cow, of a cat? And so at what point do you close that gap? I mean, think about this. The Emancipation Proclamation was signed January 1st, 1863. It took 100 years for black folk and white folk with good hearts to say, the way we treat people of color is wrong. 100 years just to say, we should maybe stop that. 100 years. So for people to think that, it was Dr. King who said that segregation was just a new form of slavery. And segregation, as we all know, ended legally in this country in the late 1960s, some places a little later. So what makes us think that just within our lifetime, that suddenly it's going to be cake and ice cream for everybody? And so being mindful of my job as a journalist, this complicated thing we're trying to figure out is whenever I can, to tell stories, and lots of people try to tell important stories to help people have the conversation.
One of the things that we haven't talked about yet, and so I just want to talk about for a few minutes before we open the floor up to questions, is how social media has changed our ability to cover this story with complexity. I think I told you when we spoke earlier that when I was in Ferguson, I was posting my stories on my Facebook page and sharing them with my friends and family. I'm from St. Louis. I have a lot of people there. And one of these people said to me on Facebook, "You just need to leave. The media needs to leave. If you would leave, then the protesters would leave and the problems would go away." I'm paraphrasing, but she basically said that. And I didn't respond. My mother raised me better than that. But the truth is that in Ferguson, at least, the story started on Twitter. And it happened on social media and in New York and in so many other places. People's ability to report on themselves has really changed our work. So what do you think is important for journalism? What's our job now when everybody's a reporter?
Right. I mean, I certainly think it is evolving. And some of it I think is negative. Some of it I think, like the horse is out of the barn. And, but I think part of it is I'm someone who takes the long view on most things. If you look at the arc of this debate in America, I'm listening right now on my iPhone, the 50 greatest speeches by Dr. Martin Luther King. And in one of those speeches, he was talking about how people, the other side, was saying, you know what, if those Jewish agitators from New York would stop coming down here, those bleeding heart liberals from St. Pete would stop coming to Alabama and making trouble. If they just go away, if them niggers causing trouble in Chicago would stay out of Birmingham, we'll be just fine. So now it's like those Twitter kids, if those bloggers, if they'd stay out of Ferguson, we'd be fine. So it is the same conversation, just with new technology. And it's certainly something as a 54-year-old guy who was on the south side of my career, right? It's tough, like the new tech, how to figure it out. I mean, I think about, for instance, like Vietnam. During the heat of Vietnam, it might take a week from the moment a battle occurred in Vietnam until it appeared on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. Well, because of, processing film, moving it from Vietnam to London, feeding it, whatever, to New York. And so therefore you had time to give it context and perspective. Now because you can report it live, there is no time for, I had another moment from the Iraq War. I'm in that same firefight I was describing earlier when I was begging the captain to kill everybody. But the moment in which I was on camera, I was swashbuckling and in control. And anyway, so there was a point, so I'm talking on the air, and I got my helmet on, I'm talking, and there's this rat-a-tat-tat of something in the background. And so the anchor, Julie Chen at CBS said, "Byron, what is that in the background?" And I said, "Oh, it's small arms fire." And she says, in the moment, "Oh, thank God." I thought to myself, boo, those aren't Tic Tacs. You know what I mean? They're thrown behind you. You can still get shot to death. But again, like in the heat of the moment, so how do you give context to moments? So I think one of the challenges is how do we figure out, how do we take the good of what's going on? Because I come from the school of thought there's more information is better than less information. It's been helpful to see things. It's been helpful on both sides to see the video, and we can sort of judge for ourselves if things just sort of pass the eye test. And so that's another perfect example of why I think this wonderful institute in this great American city is so important. Why places like Poynter are so incredibly important. Because Poynter is a place where old dogs like me can come and learn from you about the best uses of this new technology. Please know, ladies and gentlemen, some of the brightest minds in this profession, that doesn't necessarily require the brightest minds in my business, I have to admit, but some of the bright stars in my profession come to work every day in this place. And that's, I think, part of why Poynter was so important, because not just coming here for the sunshine, the respite, the nice food, the fellowship with friends, but to figure out how it is we do this thing, how we embrace new technology. My dear friend Al Tompkins is like someone who I looked like. It's funny, like I always sort of, when things happen, I kind of think, well, Byron, what do you think? But equally important is, like, I wonder what Al's take is in this situation. So please know how blessed you are to have this tremendous resource in our global profession in your town. Kenny Irby is another dear friend, and we have, we can talk about journalism, the Lord Jesus Christ, and then, the Baltimore Orioles, all in the same breath. So it's complicated, but again, I think it's still better than the alternative. I look at, for me as a journalist, a cautionary tale about why I think we have to embrace this new technology. The great Edward R. Murrow, right? One of the great standard bearers of this profession. There are quotations in the bathroom at Poynter from Edward R. Murrow. That's how big a deal he was in our business. And he got it. Well, Edward R. Murrow, as gifted a journalist as he was, Edward R. Murrow, who was a radio man, thought that television was a passing fancy. That real journalism was happening in the newspaper and sometime on radio, and young punks like Walter Cronkite were taking the nation in the wrong direction. I think history would show that maybe Mr. Murrow, for all of his wisdom, was wrong. And I think it would be easy to sort of criticize all the social media things that are going on, much of which I don't understand. Like, I recently got Twitter. I don't know how to do my Facebook thing very well. Like, my girlfriend's always yelling at me about things, or she's corrected me a few times about things that I do or don't do on Facebook. But those are important. What's the old guy, the saying is, they asked the guy, like, why do you rob banks? What's his name? That's where the money is, right? And so the same thing is as journalists. Wherever the people are, whatever instrument, and all it is an instrument, we have to use that to get the people, to inform them. So I'm not terribly bothered by, I'm confused by it, but I think it's good. Again, the more information is better. If that's what's required for people, you think about, again, throughout history, the value of having someone with a camera to take a picture. I think about, we all remember the image from Tiananmen Square of the person who stood in front of the tank. That said something to the world. I would imagine some of the pictures taken by young people on their phone and whatever in Ferguson has said something to us and said something to the world about us. So it leaves me optimistic that there's a new wave of technology, and if perhaps not on my watch, but I believe on the next generation's watch, they will find a way and say, yeah, to get it right. But certainly now things aren't, they often get it wrong.
We would love to hear your questions, and we have people in the back with mics, so if you just want to raise your hand, there's a gentleman right here in the fourth row.
Thank you. I enjoyed your talk very much, and as a 74-year-old, I don't think you're on the south side of your career.
Oh, bless you. Thank you.
Well, I hope so.
Midtown, maybe. How about that?
That's better. Using the topic race in America, I'd like a couple of words about the election of President Obama and the presidency of President Obama.
Oh, that was a question. Oh, okay. Look, certainly it was, I thought it was a significant moment, certainly for our nation. We all get that, what it says about America. And I think it says a lot of good things about America, that we all know our history and how far we've come. I remember that the night that he was elected president, I was on the set then at CBS with Katie Couric and our colleagues there, and they asked me, Bob Schieffer, what I thought. And I said, you know what, I called my mama to get this woman of the segregated South who was a child when it was illegal, impossible for black people to vote. And she was hardcore Obama supporter. And I called her up, and it was probably the third time I heard my mother cry. And I said, boo, because that's just sort of, all else fails. That's sort of the tag love line of my family. It calls somebody boo. And I said, boo, what do you think? What do you say? She said, child, whew. She said, I got 2 words. She said, no, I got 4 words. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. And just thinking what that meant to my mother and men and women of her generation. historic. I think something all of us can embrace. And I remember after I told that story, I said, but you know what the reality is, and the great thing about America, is that when he takes office, he should be judged in the same way we've judged all of his predecessors. If he gets it right, we should say that. If he gets it wrong, we should be there to question him. Now, I think one can make a debate about how often if that in fact has happened, or at least how he's been treated by members of Congress. So yeah, I mean, so I think like everything else, it is a wonderful milestone for our nation. I think there is a reasonable discussion to have about how effective President Obama has been as President of the United States. I would believe that many people who supported him passionately when he was elected feel lukewarm about that decision now. Not all, but a number of people who I've talked to. Do I think he'll go down as one of the great presidents of American history? Not sure about that. Okay, amen, yes, ma'am. No argument from me. I'm sure my mama would say that from heaven right now the same, and I certainly would never challenge her. I think there is reason that some could say that perhaps his greatest achievement might be that he was the first black president of the United States. That's just one perspective about that. So yeah, I think it is. But again, like it is just a moment in our nation's history. I don't know if I've said it in this setting, but I want to make sure that I do say it. For all that goes wrong in our nation, and there's plenty that goes wrong in this race debate, my experience, my travels professionally have made clear to me that America is still the greatest country on earth. We have no peer. Most parts of the world folk would die to have our problems. And so I think President Obama's election is a significant milestone in our nation. I would imagine in the lives of none of our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, it'll be, so what was the big deal that he was black? What was that? And I look forward, probably won't see it, of that day. So I see it just as a moment in our great nation's history.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi, thank you. Number one, I want to say thank you to you for your book that I would like for you to sign.
Yes, ma'am.
Before
Absolutely.
I leave here.
Yes, ma'am.
Good point.
And the reason I'm saying thank you for the book is because after reading the book and the things that you had to go through, I was talking to my daughter about the book, and she's married to a serviceman, and at the time he was in Afghanistan, and she was so moved by the book, she sent him the book, and he read it, and he said that it really brought tears to him because of the fact that a lot of things that you said that he could relate to. So I want to thank you for that, and my son-in-law who just retired from the service.
Awesome, congratulations.
And this month.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I told him I was going to come and get this book signed for him.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And my question is kind of twofold. You growing up the way you did. Just recently, there was a terrible crime here in the Tampa Bay area with a dog being tied to tracks and shot. And of course, the paper and the televisions made news of the fact that this poor dog, and I love dogs. My cousin here loved dogs. I have my dog and don't want nobody to bother my dog. However, they made the big news about this dog being left on the tracks, and they were looking for the culprits. They finally found the culprits, and they were about 6 young black men. And my daughters and I were talking about that situation, and what we were saying, and I thought, just like you were thinking, economics. I looked at those young men, and they said they found a dog, and they wanted the dog to fight. The dog wasn't a good fighter, so they decided to get rid of it. And my daughter said, "Oh, how ugly that is." And I'm like, "Yes, that's ugly." But you have to look at where they came from and what resources they have and what they use as a resource, either be it drugs, either be it dogs, whatever is in their community. And I can look back to that because I am in education. And at one time I worked for juvenile justice. And one time I became very close to a young man. At the age of 14, he was already considered a hardcore criminal. Very bright young man.
Yes, ma'am.
But not given the opportunity. So he used the resources he had as far as the streets, as far as the drugs, as far as that. By the time he was in 6th grade, nobody was looking for him.
Sure.
And so my question is, still in education, seeing it, seeing the number of young black men not being heard, not being seen, and falling by the way, what things they see in journalism now that can change their minds with you saying something different, seeing you doing what you did. How can we change their perspective? Because they see those young men and say, hey, man, hey, this all you had. You know, so
Yes, ma'am. Sure.
how do we get there?
Yes, ma'am. Simple answer for me as a journalist is, frankly, I don't know, right? I mean, I'm mindful of, I get the importance of images. Like I think of, part of my success journey is the late, great Ed Bradley. When I saw him on television, I saw it was possible. But one of the things I'm unclear that was it Hillary Clinton who quoted the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child? Right, for all of us, like there isn't a person in this room, I would imagine, there is not a bootstrap story in this room of anyone who pulled themselves up completely by themselves. That all of us have people who invested in us. Hopefully it's family, sometimes it's a stranger. So, when I think about those situations, I think all of us bear some responsibility to help people. Next question. Can we ask that gentleman right there, the handsome fellow with the glasses? You, yes, sir. We chatted in the hallway, so this is my plan in the group in case. Yes, sir.
My question to you is that you have a limited amount of time on television.
Yes, sir.
As opposed to, example, NPR or reading print news. How can you influence people with strictly information without any editorializing or expression of opinion in a way that balances the differences we have, and we have differences, and we have differences in culture.
Absolutely.
Between black and white communities.
Sure.
How can you balance those by also expressing the values and the commonality we share in this country, which you've been so positive about?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I think what the old sayings say, the truth shall set you free. I find in my business there's nothing sexier, more elegant, and more powerful than the truth. My late grandmother used to say, the truth may be funny, the truth may hurt, but the truth is the truth. And good and decent people can agree with that. And I think the history of my profession has shown in many times of suffering in our nation, at some point journalists do get it right. And you're right, there isn't one story, there isn't one article in the St. Pete Times or the Baltimore Sun that gets it right, but maybe like over time if we do it effectively, and I think if the public demands it. And I think people underestimate the value, the strength that people have. At ABC where I am, where they go to great lengths to measure what viewers like ratings matter a great deal. Like some days at ABC, it feels like you're at a car dealership and you're having the meeting at the end of the week to see who sold the most cars. Right? And anyone in that business, black, white, green, blue, if you sold 3 and she sold 10, you leave and she staying, right? Anyway, so when we did this week of reporting on race and justice in America, there was some concern because it was such a heavy topic that people might not want to watch it. And come to find out, the following week the ratings came in, and one of the best weeks of ratings that we had at Nightline was that week looking at this very serious topic. So that was an indicator to the bean counters in my business, because it is a business, that this kind of journalism matters. And so I think in every community, I think if the audience, the consumer, the car buyers, you say what your expectation is, that at some point the news organizations will bend to your will as opposed to you bending to do. Now, I know this number isn't right, but I may be making up these numbers, but someone told me once, it's something like, when one viewer calls in, that's seen as a view of 100 viewers at a market. A person writes in, that's seen as a view of 1,000 people. When I worked in Atlanta, there was someone whose sole job it was to respond to viewer letters. Now maybe it's email. And so if enough letters came up and enough folks said, we're going to stop doing A, B, and C, those letters made it to the general manager's office. And the general manager would then walk down to the news director's office and say, Tim, I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job, right? We all know that's the kiss of death at work, right? I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job, but you know what I heard. Or in gatherings like in this room, right, are many of the movers and shakers of this community, people who have tremendous power. So even if you're in this room and you feel like you're powerless, you go to them and say what you think. And those folk, when they see Tim in the hallway, and they're playing a round of golf with the general manager at WFLA. So the audience, I think, again, another example how all of us have a role to play in what we see and what we consume as readers and listeners and viewers of the news. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your lecture. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think our problem in this great country is we, the people. We look at each other in colors. Wrong. We're human beings.
Yeah.
We should look at each other as human beings, not red, white, black, yellow, and brown.
Yeah.
We are human beings.
Yeah.
We learn from each other and appreciate each other's good points.
Amen, amen.
And let's not call ourselves Filipino, American, African American. We are Americans. And if we don't think that way, we are divided already.
Yes, ma'am.
There's no unity in this country unless we come to that point.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be boring that the fruit is only an apple?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Boring. Honest to God, we are the problem.
Yeah.
We are the only one who can solve it. Look at each other with appreciation, learn from each other, and we'll all be happier.
Amen, amen. Thank you very much.
And let us apply it, not talk about
Sure.
it.
Yes, ma'am.
Do it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Good evening. Thanks
Hello,
for
sir.
such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, sir.
I wanted to ask you, in your profession, is there such a thing as a glass ceiling in journalism? Because clearly we do know that the whole essence of race is not just confined to Ferguson.
Sure. Oh,
that
yes, sir.
extends all the way up. Whether
Yes, sir.
you
Yeah.
work in journalism,
Sure.
Whether you are the CEO, just like you commented on those students
Yes, sir.
at Oklahoma who are going to be making decisions
Yes, sir.
in the future.
Yeah.
So how does that? I know in my profession it works.
Oh, yes, sir.
In your profession,
Yes, sir. My life, I've been a journalist now for 32 years, I think, 33. You know, how the older you get, that there was a point in my career I couldn't wait to say I've been in business for 10 years. Now it's like my mind gets faint, though, exactly how many years it's been, right? My experience has taught me that, yes, there is a glass ceiling made of cement in my business. People ask me, is there racism in the media? Yes. Is there sexism in the media? Yes. Is there discrimination based on where a person is from in the world? Yes. Is there discrimination based on your accent? Yes. It is. And in many ways, the truth about America, for all of us, that is still the price of admission. And you can be consumed by it, or you can push your way through it. There was a lot of debate, for instance, like a current example at NBC in the recent trouble of Brian Williams, who I don't know well, but I do know was a good man. And I do know my mama taught me to believe that none of us wants to be judged by our worst day. even though oftentimes in journalism, that's when we show up to tell your story on your worst day. So Lester Holt, and there was all this sort of angst for a couple days in the media. There was even some in the media wondering, well, who could replace Brian Williams? Could it be Conan O'Brien? Could it be the guy who does American Idol? Jon Stewart? Brian Seacrest? It took like a day and a half for someone to say, what about Lester Holt? Right. Brother's doing it well. Been doing it for a long time. And I was sort of surprised that sort of the leadership at NBC didn't say right away what about Lester Holt? And guess what? He doing the job. Ratings haven't gone down. They've held their own. Who knew? Now, certainly there are other organizations that were thinking, dang, right? In the competitive world that is TV news. But yeah, I mean, so there is. I mean, there are glass ceilings for women. And I'd make the argument, the other day at the office, I had some students in my office from Kent State University. We got some Kent Staters in here? Awesome, right? And so many of these, there were like 25 kids, one black kid. And of those 24 white kids, a good percentage of them were the first in their family to go to college. A number of them, like me, like many of us, came from modest means, right? These were not children of privilege. And I think one can make the argument that their upward mobility in journalism will be difficult. More difficult than, say, a kid who grew up on Park Avenue, went to prep school, went to an Ivy League school. And I sort of shared that with them, like, don't think, right? So yeah, that's who we are. But one of the great things about America is, unlike any place in the world, we still remain the only country on earth that where you're born doesn't dictate where you'll die. And right, it ain't fair, but it's still fairer than any place else. There's still opportunity. And that's why it's so important for those of us who have been blessed with whatever to be successful, to go tell the young brother, the young sister, white, black, Hispanic, Asian. You know what? It's possible. Not only can you do it, I'll help you do it, I believe. So yeah, it's certain. Yes, sir?
We're going to take one more question.
Okay, sorry.
I would like to hear the story of how you got from Baltimore, Maryland to Delaware, Ohio Wesleyan University.
Oh, sure. Sure. Well, a couple of reasons. They were offering me money. So that certainly was part of the calculation. You know, a couple of reasons. I'm a total mama's boy, right? I got accepted to a couple other schools, and I wanted to play football. I wanted to play Division I football. I met a gentleman here. One of the, as my mama would say, one of the big people at St. Peter's College. I don't know if he's still here, but he was. There he is. Hello, sir. What is your name again? Dr. Gordon. So Dr. Gordon ran track at Florida State University. Well, I wanted to be a Division I athlete, but that wasn't in my DNA. That wasn't in my gene pool for me to play Division I ball. So I have great admiration. I played Division III football. Anyway, so I wanted to play college football. I wanted to do other things. Got accepted to some other schools. But the deciding factor was Dr. Norman Vincent, one of the deciding factors, Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking, which from my mama, next to the Bible, is like the most important book ever written. And so at one point, you know, when I'm sitting next to my mom, we're looking at the applications and going over stuff, and my mother would go, That was sign for like, you better do what I want you to do, right? So I was thinking about going someplace, and Mama said, you know, Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, he went to Ohio Wesleyan. Yes, ma'am. I think you should go, but Mama, I'm thinking about going here. Okay. And I signed the paper to go to Ohio Wesleyan. And it was a great experience for me, and I'm grateful for my time there. May I ask, there's a question coming from right there, may I ask?
Yeah, sure.
Fellow journalist.
Oh, me?
Yes, sir.
Both of you guys were in Ferguson, and you saw some of the coverage there. I was wondering, why didn't local media pick up on the stuff that we saw in the Justice Department report that talked about the way black people were subjugated by the cops? Why didn't local media report on that before the Justice Department revealed it and it became this huge issue? It seems like part of the problem was that those people weren't being listened to.
Sure.
Even in their own community.
Sure. I think that my answer to that question is a perfect example we're discussing earlier about journalists being lazy. Like, I mean, one of the realities, it seems, of our business, right? I don't know if you all know this brother. He used to be the media columnist for the St. Pete Times. Respected. So I remember, so he's one of those guys in my business, when he calls, you're like, oh, which way is this going to go? Is he calling me to say I did something right, or Lord, if he's calling to tell me I did something wrong, it's going to be difficult that week. And now he is the media columnist reporter for NPR. Wonderful, gifted, who lives in this community. So yeah, it's another example, I think, of lazy reporting. And so I guess that's the St. Louis market, a sizable media market. You know, look, ours is a business now because of salaries that people that, you know, a lot of local TV celebrities, network TV celebrities who don't live in these communities. Like, one of the great cautionary tales about the Brian Williams situation is that many people saw Brian as much a celebrity, Johnny Carson-esque character as a journalist. And perhaps he may have seen himself that way. And so, you know, when I went into journalism, it was like folk were policemen, teachers, journalists. They were all kind of comparable professions. Now, I think in part because of salaries, they're like superstars. And so superstars don't get dirty that often, right? And so I think a lot of it's sort of lazy. Again, we're talking about the issue of diversity. If the entire newsroom staff doesn't live anywhere near a town like Ferguson, they don't hear about it in the grocery store, it isn't discussed at church. Certainly the management probably doesn't live in those neighborhoods. So I think it is a perfect example of the disconnect of the, as Dr. King said, the language of the unheard. And again, and that's one of the great things about Poynter, that it teaches you how to identify stories. I know when I've sat in on classes that Al was talking, they bring in young journalists from all over the country who'll bring in, you know, on day one, everybody's reel looks the same. It's the same kind of story. But oftentimes, after spending 3-5 days at Poynter, those same journalists, a year later, they now have, it's amazing how, and this says something about the educational, how many young reporters don't know how to do basic investigative work, like don't know how to do research, how to find information. I know anyone who is a parent or a grandparent, we see it with our kids, right? I know like my baby, a senior in college. If she can't find it on Google, she doesn't believe it exists, right? And so you have a generation of journalists who don't live in the communities. They don't know how to do research. There is still a lack of diversity in newsrooms, because even like me, I've not lived in a neighborhood like East Baltimore since I went to college in 1978. But my uncles, cousins, my folks still live there. And so I think, again, is an example of the lack of diversity, the laziness that exists in our business. Because, you know, journalists are like, it's an interesting thing. It's like every journalist wants to win an award, right? Just from a selfish professional ambition thing. Just think of all the incredible awards journalists in St. Louis could have won 8 years ago, 15 years ago, if they had done that kind of old school shoe leather reporting. So it's like all of us are sort of motivated by our self-interest. So even in their own self-interest, they were still lazy in doing great reporting. But again, it is, I would imagine, though Poynter is this jewel in this community, I would imagine there's some things going on in St. Pete, Tampa, Largo that ain't that cool, that the good folk here aren't covering. I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes, because the same thing, you know, news organization I come. Like right now, I'm working on a story right now for ABC News about what it means to be Muslim in America. I'm a proud son of a Baptist mother, girlfriend, a woman of faith. You know, we go to church every Sunday, love the Lord, have a sense of faith. I have like one friend who's Muslim. So nothing in my life experience necessarily prepares me to tell that story. And I'm sure we're going to make mistakes going into it. And you would think, again, news organizations, I'll shut up after this. So like news organizations finally began to hire black people in the 1960s, right? When they were rioting in America and white reporters were getting beaten up. And it's like, you know what? Tell you what, can you go? Because we can't, if we send another white guy down there, we got more insurance stuff to pay. So it wasn't like out of like, oh, you know, the heavens open and wise white TV executives said, we're going to start hiring diversity. It's like, you know what? They are tearing our equipment up, beating up our people. We got to get some black people in here. It's almost like who was the guy when it was the famous story about when Bear Bryant, Thank you for remembering, right? I think when Bear Bryant played, I think it was Ohio State, because Bear Bryant didn't ever recruit black players. USC, that's right. Who was the running back? Sam Cunningham. That's who it was, Sam Cunningham. So legendary story about, Bear Bryant, this great coach, didn't want black players, can win without him. And they're playing USC, and Sam Cunningham is like walking up and down the field like Alabama was state in Alabama. And as legend has it, after the game, Bear Bryant said, I'm going to get me some of those. And so the same thing happened with bringing blacks into newsrooms in the 60s. And I hope we someday soon reach the place in news organizations, again, that when we talk about Muslim Americans and that very heated, complicated story in our nation right now would be improved if there were people of that religious tradition. Because I know, for instance, when we do a story about faith at ABC News, and, someone starts talking about, like all of us now, like there are some Christians who are snake worshipers, right? God bless them. There are a couple of them out there, right? Well, I know, and there's a creek between some forms of Christianity and worshiping snakes. But sometimes I'll hear the discussions in my newsroom by non-believers who think it's like one and the same. I'm like, hold up, bro. I mean, we're not all, Some of us speak in tongues, right? But you know what I mean? So anyway, so it's about having diversity in your newsroom, hardworking people in your newsroom, a community that demands to be heard for all those things. So I think everyone, because one could also make the argument, why weren't the folk in Ferguson beating down the door of the St. Louis Dispatch and the TV station saying, this is what's going on in my child, right? Because black folk have owned cell phones just like everybody else. I'm sure black folks were one of the first people to own cell phones in St. Louis County. They were, you know what I mean? So I think, again, it's the perfect example that there is sufficient blame to go all places.
I want to ask one final question before Tim comes over, and that's just...
I promise a Presbyterian answer, not a Baptist answer.
So I know we're not all journalists in this room, but I just wonder if you have any advice for the journalists who are here or our audiences about how we can do a better job of telling real, complicated stories on a daily basis. I think, again, from the community, I think reaching out, holding the news organizations in your town accountable, that you're a viewer. I have my Aunt Gladys, a former IBM executive, who writes letters all the time. Like all the TV stations in Raleigh, North Carolina know my Aunt Gladys. So your voice matters, I think, doing that. For the journalists in the room, again, if it's purely selfish ambition to be successful, there's a Ferguson in every community. Be the one to tell those important stories. And, at the end of the day, I don't think it's, it ain't that complicated, right? It's for the journalists in the room, do your job, and you will find those stories. And the last thing I'll say about, sort of in general about things, the philosophy by which my mama raised me, I think, has served me well professionally, and I think it served many of us well. My mama said, if you work hard and pray hard and treat people right, good things will happen. That's my journey. I think it's true for most of us. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, brother. My pleasure. Thank you.
Byron, we could listen to your Baptist answers all night. I think it was a real privilege to have you here in St. Petersburg and at Poynter. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Please, one more round of applause.
Thank you.
For a great journalist and an even better person, Byron
Pitts.
Pitts.
Thank you all so much. Thank you all. Have a good weekend.
Thank you all. Have a good weekend.